CEO's twin daughters order a meal at the restaurant. They stop to listen to a waitress crying. It was a morning like so many others in Jacob Reed's busy life, and yet something about that Tuesday felt different. Maybe it was the way the sun pierced the kitchen pane as her daughters, Ayla and Leah, laughed in unison as they combed each other's hair. 8-year-old twins as similar in face as they are different in look, one more curious, the other more sensitive. Jacob watched them, in silence, with the rare feeling that he needed to give them something other than comfort and expensive toys. It needed to give history, roots, truth. It was then that she had the idea to take the girls to the first restaurant of the chain that she built with so much sweat, a place he hadn't visited in years. I wanted them to smell the plate, hear the clinking of the dishes, see up close the cradle of what today supported hundreds of families. It wouldn't just be a walk, it would be an adventure, a memory to keep in your childhood pocket. But life has a cruel talent for interrupting moments like this, doesn't it? An urgent problem in the office, an unexpected call. Jacob hesitated. She looked at her daughters already in the back seat, excited, wearing identical clothes and a twinkle in her eyes that only innocence carries. And then he decided he would leave Ayla and Leah at the restaurant for an hour. Just 1 hour. She told the employees that they were accompanied, but did not reveal who they were. Anyway, what would be the problem? Have you ever felt that subtle shiver that something was misaligned, even when everything seems to be in place? That's what the girls felt when they entered that restaurant. They couldn't name it. But there was something strange in the air. Maybe it was the way the agents looked at each other, or how impatient the customers seemed. Ayla held her sister's hand. Leah replied with a firm grip. None of them said a word. They just observed. They sat side by side at a table by the window. They ordered juice and chips, and they stood there in silence, like little spies of fate. Because sometimes it is the gaze of a child who first perceives what adults pretend not to see. But what exactly did they see? What in that restaurant so important to their father was so wrong? And why did their hearts start beating differently, as if anticipating something that hadn't even happened yet? Maybe, just maybe, that hour that Jacob thought would be just an innocent pause would become the starting point of something irreversible. And what came next, you need to listen carefully. The order arrived quickly. A glass of juice, a portion of potatoes, and along with him, a girl in a simple apron and a smile that didn't match her eyes. Megan, so the plaque pinned to her chest said, tried to look cheerful, but the twins noticed a detail that most adults would have overlooked. Her eyes were red, not tired and of recent crying. It was a look that said a lot without making a sound, as if she had been disassembled inside, but still struggled to look whole. Leah looked at Ayla without saying anything. Ayla responded with a slight shake of her head. They both knew, even without understanding why, that there was something wrong with this girl. When Megan turned her back, the illusion was shattered for good. A dry scream cut through the hall. It came from the kitchen, like thunder that explodes, where there are no clouds. "Hurry up with those dishes, Megan!" A man's voice charged with impatience and cruelty. The twins were startled. Megan froze. He did not answer. He just hurried his steps, his shoulders shrugged and the tray shaking. On the window table, the juice no longer seemed so sweet. The potatoes turned cold. Ayla rested her chin on her hands and didn't take her eyes off Megan. Leah lowered her gaze, cowering, as if she wanted to disappear. And then, in a silent gesture, Ayla reached under the table. Leah held on, strong, as if that simple touch could protect them, and protect someone who, until minutes ago, was a stranger. Why didn't anyone say anything? Why did the other employees pretend not to hear? How many times had that same scene been repeated inside, away from their father's eyes? The restaurant that Jacob valued so much. It was also the place where Megan, the sad-eyed girl, fell apart a little more each day. But no one saw it. Nobody cared. Or perhaps everyone just learned to look this other way? Everyone minus 2 8-year-old girls. And what they would do next you would never imagine. Because sometimes, a child's heart is the compass that points north that adults forgot to follow. Ayla has always been the most restless. When something bothered her, her feet dangled faster under the table. Leah, on the other hand, had a more restrained manner, but her eyes spoke for her. Eyes that were now fixed on the kitchen door, where a hurried coming and going of employees came and go. None of them smiled. None looked into the eyes. It was Ayla who suggested with a barely perceptible whisper, "Let's see what's there." Leah hesitated, but something in her chest told her that they couldn't ignore what they were feeling. Then they stood up slowly, trying to look like just two curious girls. And deep down, that's what they were. But they were also something more. They were silent witnesses of a pain that no one dared to name. They reached the half-open steel door that led to the kitchen. The smell was stronger there. Hot oil, hurried food, stuffy sweat. But what really remained in the air, it was the sound. A sound that should never exist anywhere. The sound of a suppressed cry, a choking sob between orders and pots. It was Megan. 6 hours without stopping, he murmured through tears. Not even 5 minutes to drink water. And then it came again. The cutting voice of Rick, the manager, erupting like a razor. "If you can't take it, Megan, ask to leave. It's full of people wanting your spot." Ayla took a step back as if the scream had pushed her. Leah, without thinking, took the tablet she carried in her backpack. He pressed the record button. He hid the device against his body. His little fingers trembled. She didn't know exactly why she was doing it. She just knew she needed to keep this moment. Because something inside her said that the world needed to hear. Their hearts were beating fast. It was no longer a joke. It was no longer a simple visit to a restaurant. It was as if they had passed through an invisible portal where the adult world showed its cracks. That moment, it tore the charm of childhood. And would anyone believe them? Would anyone hear what they had to show when they left? Or would that pain, like so many others, be swallowed up by routine and silence? That afternoon, Ayla and Leah discovered that courage has no age, and that's sometimes what changes everything. It starts with a simple record button. When Jacob Reed returned to the restaurant to pick up his daughters, he expected smiles, some childish mess, maybe a drawing made with ketchup and napkin. But what he found were two girls with different eyes. They were not sad. They were firm, as if they had seen something that time does not erase. Leah held the tablet tightly. Ayla walked fast, as if the words inside her were about to explode. "Dad, we need to show you something." And he listened. Sitting inside the car with the engine still running, Jacob watched the video. She heard every word, every sob, every muffled scream from Rick. He saw Megan trying to hold on as she was shattered into invisible pieces. And then Jacob, the CEO, the man who founded that network, who spoke of culture of respect in meetings, was silent. There were no excuses at that moment. There was no way to rationalize. There was no report that explained the omission. His face was still, but inside, something was crumbling. Shame came like a wave, not just for what was happening in the restaurant, but for having blindly trusted systems that he no longer saw up close. He who spoke about values at conferences had strayed too far from the essence. And now it was her 8-year-old daughters who were showing the truth. That night, Jacob did not sleep. He relived every scene in the video, thought of Megan, thought of Rick, and mainly, he thought about the girls. What kind of man would he be if he pretended that none of this happened? What kind of father would he be if he ignored what his daughters showed him with such courage? The next morning, the plan was already formed. Changing suit for jeans. From a designer watch to a common wristwatch. By private driver, by any taxi. Jacob Reed returned to the same restaurant, but now, like no one else. An ordinary customer. An observer in silence. He ordered a coffee and sat down at a table near the counter. The attentive look, breath suppressed. I wanted to feel. I wanted to see. And the question hammered in his mind. How many Megans are behind my success? He didn't know it yet, but on that day, the revolution would begin. And the trigger had been squeezed by two 8-year-old girls. It was around noon, when the restaurant began to fill up. The typical buzz of lunch took over the room. Orders being taken down, dishes being delivered, impatient customers looking at the clock. Jacob, with his cap down and his beard unshaven, watched everything in silence. He was no longer the CEO at that moment. He was just a father, and a man about to face the truth without filters. It was then that she entered. Megan, with the same apron, the same tired smile, and the same sad eyes. He was carrying 3 plates balanced in his arms when he accidentally bumped into the elbow of a distracted customer. A fork fell to the ground. The customer complained loudly, and before she could apologize, Rick emerged. From the kitchen like lightning. "Are you going to drop the whole restaurant, Megan?" His voice tore through the hall like a sharp blade. Everyone looked. "You're a disaster. This is not daycare for weak people." Megan, visibly shaken, tried to smile and bend over to pick up the fork, but his hands trembled. That's when Jacob saw, as if time froze around, 2 little familiar heads sitting at a table on the other side. Ayla and Leah, his daughters. He did not know that his grandmother had decided to bring them to lunch there, but there they were, motionless, looking, and what you saw in their eyes broke something inside him. It wasn't just astonishment. It was disappointment. It was the silent, innocent, and cruel question. "Dad, why is no one helping her?" There was no more time for plans, no more room for excuses. It was now. Jacob stood up slowly. He took off his cap. He straightened his posture. Every step he took to the center of the hall was a blow to his own conscience. When she stopped next to Megan, who was still kneeling collecting cutlery, silence took over the restaurant. He looked at Rick, and in a firm voice, without raising the tone but loaded with authority, he said, "It ends here." Megan stared at him, confused. Rick laughed as if he were facing a client who was too brave, but then Jacob took the fake badge out of his pocket and threw it over the counter. "My name is Jacob Reed, and I own this place." The silence turned to ice. It was the moment of truth, and the entire restaurant, customers, employees, even the cutlery, seemed to hold its breath, because sometimes it is necessary to stop everything to remind the world of what really matters. And on that day, in that instant, Jacob remembered, because his daughters were watching. The badge fell to the counter with a dry crack, too small for the noise it made inside people. Jacob Reed was standing there, unscripted, without advisors, without the usual CEO armor. He was just a man faced with his own responsibility. The entire restaurant plunged into an almost sacred silence. Rick, the manager who minutes earlier had been spitting out orders, was paralyzed. He tried to laugh, as if it were a joke, but the truth was stamped on everyone's faces. The highest authority was there, and she was furious. "Rick, you're fired, and with just cause." The words cut through the air with precision. There was no screaming. There was no exaggeration. But the impact was overwhelming. Rick tried to babble something, but Jacob didn't even listen. I was looking at Megan, and what he saw was a different cry, not out of fear, not out of shame, but of relief. The woman who had been living oppressed behind the counters now seemed to breathe for the first time in days, perhaps weeks. Next to the counter, another employee watched everything in silence. Connor, the silent helper, always on his own, always doing what he could with dignity. Jacob turned to him and said, "Thank you for not being silent inside, even when everything told you to shut up." Connor just nodded, visibly moved. And then Jacob called 2 presences who, up to that moment, had been watching from afar. Ayla and Leah came to the center of the room, with shy steps but eyes shining with something they might not even know how to name. Pride, justice, love. Jacob bent down until he was at their height and said, "Now for all to hear." They didn't just see a restaurant. They saw what many adults ignore. They saw the pain disguised as silence, fear dressed as routine. And it was because of them that this is changing. Customers applauded. Employees looked at each other with tears in their eyes. Megan, with her hand on her heart, seemed not to believe what was happening. That scene, 2 8-year-olds next to the father who learned from them, was imprinted in the souls of everyone there. That day, it was not just a dismissal. It was an uprising, a course correction, a collective reminder that no one is invisible. And Jacob Reed, the man of reports and meetings, discovered right there on that greasy, voice-filled floor that the real power is not in who's in charge. It is in those who choose to listen. And he had heard it. Two tiny voices, two non-negotiable truths called Ayla and Leah. The impact of that day did not fade with time. On the contrary, it grew like the silent root of a new tree. Jacob Reed, once known as an effective and ambitious manager, has come to be recognized for something rare in the corporate world: true listening. He didn't just fire Rick or promote Megan. He understood that the problem was bigger and systemic. Days later, in a room lit by natural light and full of pictures with the first stores of the chain, Jacob announced something that surprised everyone: the creation of the Ayla and Leah policy. Strange name for a business policy, perhaps. But for him, there was no other possible. This new guideline provided for mandatory humanized breaks for all employees who worked long shifts. It also provides for a direct line with the board, where any employee from any sector can report abuses or suggest improvements without intermediaries. And the most touching, a monthly award called Heart of the Month, aimed at those who demonstrated genuine care for others. Not productivity, not goals, but empathy. In the first meeting, some investors frowned. They said it was too romantic, unfeasible, too sensitive for today's market. But Jacob only smiled and asked, if my daughters entered this unit today, what would they see? What would they feel? This question has become a mantra within the company. The managers began to repeat among themselves. The employees began to look at each other with different eyes, and something began to change quietly. Posters with children's drawings were placed in the internal areas with the phrase, if you've seen someone tired, ask how you can help. Others said empathy is not a bonus, it's the new normal. Jacob now visits without warning units of the chain, not as an inspector, but as a father. He walks in, orders a coffee, sits quietly, and watches. He talks to employees, listens to stories, and always ends with the same question for you. Would my daughters be proud of this here? Ayla and Leah, without even knowing it, had become architects of a transformation. They didn't know about net profit, nor about team turnover, but they knew how to recognize sadness in someone's eyes. That's it, is worth more than any MBA, because sometimes only when we see the world through the eyes of a child is that we finally learn to be adults. A few months passed. The city went at its pace. Cars continued to fill the intersections, and restaurants, as always, opened their doors early. But there was something different about that particular unit of Reed's Diner, something that you didn't see on the menu or measure in profits. On that sunny morning, Ayla and Leah returned with Jacob. The twins wore the same bows in their hair, but now they walked with a different lightness, as if they knew deep down that they had left a mark there that no one else could erase. Jacob opened the door for them with a discreet smile. He was no longer the hurried businessman he used to be. It was the man who learned to look. As soon as they entered, they were greeted with hugs. Megan was behind the counter preparing a cappuccino, but there was something different about her as well. It wasn't just the new uniform or the looser hair. It was the real smile, the one that no longer pretends. The kind of smile that comes when the soul finally rests. Leah was the first to see. In the corner of the wall, near the clock and the bulletin board, was a framed board. Inside, a simple design with childlike features and hearts in red. Megan on one side, crying. Ayla and Leah on the other, holding hands, holding out a napkin. And at the top, written in large letters, "You saw her crying, so help." Jacob approached slowly and stayed there for a while. Silent. Property. There was no way to describe what he felt. Pride? Yes. Gratitude? Very much. But most of all, direction. An eternal reminder of why he did what he did. Connor appeared soon after. now with a different badge, assistant manager, smiling, confident, firm. It was the same Connor as before, only now seen. Jacob greeted him with a strong handshake as if to say, "Thank you for holding on." The girls ordered hot chocolate. They sat at the same table in the window where it had all begun, and Jacob watched them with moist eyes as they laughed at something silly, tapping his fingers on the glass. It was then that he thought, "This is how I want to lead. Always." As if they were there. As if his innocent eyes were in every detail. Because, deep down they were Ayla and Leah changed a restaurant, but they also changed a man. And through him, they changed the world of many people. And it all started with a question that no child should have to ask. Why isn't anyone helping her? Now the answer is there, hanging on the wall, and live in every gesture, in every pause, in each care. Because empathy, when it is born in the pure heart of a child, it becomes a legacy. Sometimes the change the world needs doesn't start with big speeches or fancy plans. It begins with the silence of two children watching. With a small gesture, like holding her sister's hand. With the courage to hear a cry and not pretend it didn't happen. Ayla and Leah had no positions, no power, no age to make a difference. But they did. Because where adults get used to pain, children are still amazed. And it is in this astonishment that the cure lies. So before you ignore someone tired, ask. Before judging someone silent, realize. And before you go about your routine like everything is fine, ask yourself, what would my children see if they were here now? Perhaps it's time to look at the world through the eyes of Ayla and Leah. Perhaps the future we hope for is waiting for us in a simple gesture of empathy. If this story moved, you don't leave here quietly. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I saw it. I help." Share this video with 3 people who need to remember what it is to be human. And subscribe to the channel now, because in the next stories, you will discover how a double ticket changed the life of an entire city. And yes, there are children in the middle again. Clicks, comments, shares, because the world changes when we stop to listen to those who still have the courage to feel.